Thank you for joining this workshop, and before I get started, I want to apologize for not being able to do this session, the fifth session, at its scheduled time, which was around 5 days ago. I was really busy during the past couple of days dealing with a family emergency. Now everything is settled down and I could do this eventually. So I am really sorry for not being able to do this on time. Great, let's get started. This session, as you all know, is about, as you might know, is about function generators, ES6 Function Generators, and Redux-Saga, which is a Redux middleware. During all these sessions, we have had different, we have tried to cover different types of topics, one of which has been middlewares and React Redux lifecycle. And this session that we had revolved around the way that we could add new middlewares to our Redux workflow. Using that approach, we could use a ton of different types of middlewares. We have Redux-Saga covered in the first session, and in this session we are going to cover Redux-Saga, which is another middleware which can be used as a replacement for Redux-Saga. Okay, let's open the directory. As you might know, the structure of this workshop goes like this. We have notes to cover first, and then the other half of the session is live coding. But this session, I don't have a lot of notes because of this specific topic. We have to do more live coding instead of covering notes. But we have some notes, and I have provided a couple of links here. After this session, I'm going to add more links to this page, and just in case you want to learn more about function generators and also Redux-Saga. So the first thing that we should cover is what is a generator? What are generators? And the reason that we need to know about generators is that Redux-Saga is using ES6, JavaScript ES6, or ES6 function generators. So this is what you see here is a simple function generator. You can think of generators as processes, pieces of code that you can pause and resume. This is something that we missed for a really long time in JavaScript. One of the huge issues that we usually have in JavaScript is that we have to always be worried about not blocking the I/O when we have in browser like XHR requests or in Node I/O operations. We don't have to block the thread because JavaScript is a single-threaded programming language. So, which means we cannot pause a process. If we pause that, if we do a sync XHR request, for instance, or a sync I/O call to read a file from server, the whole thread is going to be paused. Now, using function generators, we could simply use this yield keyword to pause a function in the middle of that without the whole thread being paused. So this is the structure. There are two new syntaxes added to the JavaScript. One is the star sign that you see over here. The other is the yield keyword, and works like this. So if you just copy this piece of code, open the developer console, paste the code over here, this is how it works. a generator function, a function generator in JavaScript doesn't actually return, doesn't return the actual value. If, in this case, as you see, there is no return statement, which means usually when a function doesn't have a return statement, the actual return value is undefined. But in this case, when we call this function, what it returns is a generator object. Let's call this like this. So let's see what we have here. Okay, as you see, it is not undefined. It is a generator function. So far, as you see, we haven't had any console log over here. What it has this generator object has a next function which we could use to go to the next pause in the code. Here we go. So this is when initially when you call the function, nothing happens. It just creates a generator. First time that you call the next, the execution of your function is at that point the execution process is going to be started like this. So as you see, we eventually have this first in the console right here like this. So now, but we don't have the second in the console, which means the function has been paused. But as you see, everything works. The cursor works, and we could just scroll down, which means the thread is not paused. If you call a synchronous XHR request, or if you do something, like reading sync, using sync operations, when we use, when we have I/O operations in Node.js, the whole thread is paused, not something like this. But here, the only thing that has been paused is just this function. Now, to go for the next round, all we have to do is just to one more time call the next on the generator object. Now we have the second. But as you can see here, other than the console log that we had first, we have another thing in the console, the return value of the next. So at both cases we have had undefined. The only difference here is that done is false, done is true, because in the middle of the execution of a function, the done should be false, which means the function, the execution process is not finished yet. But when you see done is true, it means that the execution process is done. So we are going to cover more and more in the live coding part. So as we just discussed, we have two different syntaxes: function, this is star sign right next to the function keyword, and the yield. So I guess we have covered almost all the notes that we have here. But before we dig more into function generators, we have to learn something else as well. Other than generators, JavaScript has another concept, another actually pattern implemented as iterable values. For instance, one of the iterable values is arrays. So what is the difference between a simple iteration when we use a for loop and using iterable pattern to iterate over a list? So we have arrays, strings, maps, sets. Now in the current versions of JavaScript, not all of these data types have been added to all of the browsers, but let me see. I guess we have map here, yes, and we also have set, and string and array both are from the old versions of JavaScript. So let's see here. For instance, we could create a set like this. Let's see how this works. So the relevance, when we talk about iterator pattern and iterators in JavaScript, is when we have this next dot next that I showed you before in generator object comes from iterable pattern, which means a generator object is an iterable value. Let's see what does it mean, an iterable value. So let's just create a simple. Okay, let's pause this here because the rest is actually live coding, and I have much better code than this to show you. Let's go to my IDE. Here we go. So this is what I have prepared. We could run this code through using Node.js and in browser. So let's see. Okay, let's see what we have here. Okay, let me just remove the rest. So far we have a list using sets, and you could have access to the values of a list like this, and the values, you know, what you could see here, the return value of dot values function when you have a set is another iterable value, which means you could call dot next on that object. And if you call dot next, let's see what we are gonna have. Here we go. Value. So we have this value. Value here is a done false. So this is, as you see, using dot next, we iterate over the list, but only over its values lazily, which means we could iterate over a specific list, you know, while, you know, it's totally different from the old-fashioned way of iteration when we have the whole list and we have to iterate over that by index. But this means that we could iterate over the list lazily. So let's see what happens if we add one more next to this one. Okay, let's save this and run this code again. Value 2, value b done false, which means in this case, done false means that the list still has values, you know, for the iteration. So values. Here we go. Value 3, value c, a, b, c done is still false. Let's see now what happens if we call one more next. Final value is undefined. When we have an iterable value, and here the final value is undefined, but the only thing that we have is this done. We could use this done, if we want to, we could use this done in a while loop, and we could simply iterate over that until this done is true, because it's going to be, you know, it's going to be always false until there is nothing in the list to be iterated over. So, but instead of using a while loop, now in JavaScript we have similar to for in loop, now we have for of. So like this, which works like this. So we could let value of list. When you do this, what happens is it iterates over the values of this list. So let's just comment this part. Yeah, let's just comment this whole section out and run this code again. value A, B, C. It's just a simple iteration, as you can see that, as you can see this here, similar to for in loop. For in loop is not good for iteration over arrays, but we could use that. So let's try this for let's. But as we all know, when we use in, the value that we have here is not actually the value of the array. It's the index or the key of the object that we are iterating over using for in loop. So that one of the differences when we use for of in JavaScript is that for of gives you the value, but for in gives you the keys. So let's just say we have a simple array like this. Now if I do this console.log, instead of 1, 2, 3, let's see what I'm gonna have. 0, 1, 2, because it's not the value. It is, if you want to have access to the value, you have to just use the key to extract the value from the original object, or in this case, the array. So now, just let me show you in browser, because this part works the same both in browser and also in Node. Okay, let's see what this has. Let's first off, instead of pushing an array, and when we have an array, when we want to push add something to that array like this, we could do this here using add. Okay, and it also gives us this dot values, which is another iterable value, and also keys, which is another iterable value. So let's create a set like this. New list equals this. So we have new list now, set as 0. Let's see what we could add, how this works. Let me just add one value. So if it's like a simple array, now I should be able to do this, but it doesn't work this way. It doesn't work this way because it's not a list. It's not it's not an array. It's a set. So let's see all the keys. We have one key, which is 1. All the values, we have one value, which is 1. Which means when we add something in a set like this, if we pass just one single parameter, it works like this. So if we pass, now let me pass something else like string ABC. So new list now has new list values has 2 values, and new list keys has 2 keys. So this is something cool. Now let's add 2 parameters. Let's see what happens if I do this. Okay, now I have ABC in my keys, and in my values, let's just say for var value of values console.log 1 ABC. Now let me do the same for keys. One ABC, which, as you see, what we have here, they both. So set works like an array, but with one single difference, that set is iterable, but array is the old-fashioned way of doing this. Let's just fiddle around with another iterable data type, map. If I create a map object, now new map. So this map object, let's see what this have. Dots. So entries. It has entries. So entries. And as you see, entries has dot next with this next, which means again, entries is the iterable value. Whenever we have this dot next, the return value is this, done true or false, and the value. So let's now, we have this map object. Let's see how we could add new stuff to this map object dot. As you can see this here, we have get, we have delete, we have clear, and we have set. If I do this now, ABC and 1, so as you can see this, it's really awesome, the way that it prints in the console is really interesting. So let's just say now object, similar to set, I did the same. I added, instead of add now, I have set map object dot keys. It has only ABC, and values, it has only 1. So in set, because set is just similar to an array, but it's iterable implementation. It has keys and values, but keys and values in a set returns the same thing. But in map, keys and values are different. What would happen now here that I have this map? We used to have this challenge in JavaScript that whenever we have this hash object, so some might call it a JSON object, I call it just a JavaScript object. We usually have this, the keys are strings, ABC and 1. OBJ. What is the difference between this OBJ and our map object here? So this session is not going to be a complete tutorial about these topics, but because of the because of the function generator topic, we have to just see what does it mean to have iterable values. That's why I'm doing this. So now if I set something now, we always had this thing in mind that why we can't have objects as keys. Let's create an object, obj1 equals just simple object. My object, it has a name. Now let's just set, instead of key, let's pass obj1, and instead of value, let's pass a string. My object. Here we go, it works. So let's just look at this. It's a map of, so as you see, first time that I called sets, I didn't pass anything. Key and value both were undefined. So second time I called sets with ABC and 1 and it worked. Now I just called obj1, I passed obj1 as the key and string as the value. Now, is it really a hash that we could have like anything as the key? Yes, it's what we had expected JavaScript to have for a really long time, but we didn't have it. Let's just get now by its key obj1. Here we go, it works. Now it is an iterable data type. We could call it this way, map object. So let's see, just a for of, let's see what happens if I do this, of just a map object. So value here we go. So it has, let's see if you have questions. Nope, I thought someone asked the question. Sorry. Let's get back to work. Is everything okay? Can you hear me? Great. Just wanted to make sure. Okay, now, as I said, we had keys. If I do this now, I'm going to have undefined, which was the first key, ABC, which was the second one, and this object, name my object, as the third key in my list. Now, if I pass values, and I do this, I'm going to have the values of that map. So now I guess you know what it means when we talk about iterable values and iterables. So this is a totally new way of iteration. So it's totally new in JavaScript though, because iterable pattern had been implemented before in other programming languages like Java. And using iterable patterns, it was like we usually use that done, you know, we call next, and it has next. An iterable object value in Java has a method called has next, which you call that, it gives you something, you know, you could just iterate over that using a while loop and obj.hasNext until you have all the items on that iterable list. Let's go for the next part. Okay, now we have covered this part. Awesome. Okay. Let me close this one. About generators though, what we had, we created a very basic generator, like, you know, a simple generator like the one that I showed you in my notes, that you could use yield keyword to pause. But the point about this yield keyword, that the interesting point about this yield keyword is that yield keyword, you know, function generator actually mixes two different patterns. One is iterable pattern that I just showed you, and the other one is the generator pattern. And the way that it works is really interesting. Let me show you. So we have, let's create a simple generator function. My generator. If I do this, let x equals yield 10. This is the most interesting part of this pattern. The first thing that you could do, you could pass value to the iterator like this. Let's try this one first. So here, my generator. So what I should do is something like this. Call the my generator like this. Now I have the gen, which is suspended because I haven't yet called next. So let's call next. So here, let's obj equal next. Now this obj, as you see, have this value 10. Whatever you put over here is going to be the value of that iteration. So this is the interesting part. You could, here we don't have a list. So we don't have an iterable value similar to a list, a map, a set, or an array. We have a function. But whatever you put right next to the yield keyword on the right side would be the value of that pause point. So, and as you see, it's false. The done is false, which means the execution process has not been finished. So if I do, again, let obj2 and gen.next, then obj2, value is undefined, done is true. So let's see now. Let's change the code. If I do this, input value. So this is a really awesome way of injecting values from totally outside of the function into the function using yield keyword. Input value wouldn't be 10. Input value would be whatever we pass in the next. Let's see now. Okay, let's call for the first sign. Oh, gen is already here. Gen 2. Okay, gen 2 should be suspended, which is, so gen is not suspended, is closed, because we have called next twice on gen, and now it's closed. But gen 2 is not closed. So let's call the same, like, do this. Let's obj, let's say, value 1 equals gen2.next. So now here in value 1, value is 10. But do you see this undefined? This is, let me just, I have to clean everything and change something. I have to make sure we have this right. Now I'm gonna print that in the console. Okay, much better. Now let's just create the generator. My gen equals my generator. Now my gen, the next. So let's just store that in value 1. So here, so far, we have called the function right to this yield part, but we haven't yet called the second yield to see what is the value of the input value. Let's call that as well, value. So let's see what we have in value first. Okay, the value is 10 because we passed 10 over here and the done is false. Let's create val2. Here we go. Input value is undefined. So how do we get to, pass something, inject something into this generator function? All we have to do is just to create another generator using the same function, mygen2. Now, when I call next here, value, I could pass something here. My awesome value from outside. So we have already created our function. So it's not like a closure thing that we could wrap the function inside another function to be able to add a dynamic value. But now if I call this next again to get the second value, my gen, we already have my gen. This one here should have been gen2. One more time, my gen2 value 2. Let me just reload the page to clear everything from here, and let's create this function again. And let's create the generator here. Great. So if I now my gen.next and pass a string to the next, let's see what it returns. Obj equals value is 10, done is false. Now let's var obj2 equals my gen dot next, and let's pass another string here. Here we go. Do you see this another string, an input value? This is for the first time that we call next here, right here. It starts from this point, this curly bracket, right to this point, to the yield keyword. So far, it's the starting point. The starting point, whatever you pass as this string here, it's not going to be used inside your code. But now that function is paused right in this yields point, in the next call, you could pass a string. You could inject a new value, new object to your function. So it's something interesting that we have this yield keyword which pauses the function. From the outside, we give it 10. From the right side, we give it 10. And on the left side, it gives us another string, as you see just here. And this is exactly how yield works, because it's a mix of two different patterns, iterable pattern and generator pattern. This yield keyword is a great combination that could help us specifically implement a really awesome, asynchronous approach. And there are a ton of different JavaScript libraries using function generators that you could find online, and one of which is Co, using function generators that could help you create an asynchronous approach like this, but using a combination of promises and yield keyword and it's a really awesome way of handling asynchronous operations. The other thing is the library that I have created, which is Awaitify. So, and I'm going to show you the code right in my IDE. Yeah, this is the Awaitify that works like this. You could pass it a function generators, and what Awaitify returns is a simple function. It's not this get users that you see here. It's not a function generator anymore. It's just a simple function that you could call, and it works like as though you have returned a promise inside that. So you see this yield keyword, you could yield on every promise. So jQuery.get returns a promise. So instead of doing jQuery.get and passing a .then with the callback function, with the function inside .then to get the value, now you could simply do this. So this works the same with co. Awaitify has another features as well, but this is the part that I thought you might like. So let's go over the code to see how it works. So this is where it creates that function. Do you see this function? This function is exactly what you see here, this make generator. This is the generator function that you create and you pass to the Awaitify, and now here it starts calling that here creates a generator object in line number 38, and as you see it starts calling next on generator object. So it using promises. So this handle function goes into the try catch, and if you take a look at this handle generator, the first next, as you see, doesn't have any parameter passed to that, because as I said before, whatever you pass, it's going to be it's not going to be used in your code. So because it's the starting point. The starting point is just to start the execution process of the generator right to your first yield keyword in your code. Now, if you go to this handle function, as you would see that it works like a recursive asynchronous operation. And this is all you should, you could implement the same thing, implement this whole Awaitify library just with these couple of lines of code. This is all the algorithm that you should learn if you want to do that. So now, we have covered this part. I guess. Yes. So this is one of my, this is a code, the result of one of my other workshops about the evolution of asynchronous programming. And this evolution had a couple of steps. The first one was callback, hell, and using callbacks. The second step was promises, and the third step was using generators. And I have just copied and pasted the generator, the code that we had created here during the live coding process. So, and I'm going to just show you how it works. So I have two different functions doing the same thing: get JSON sync and get JSON async. Both do the same thing, do the same thing. The first one do it in a synchronous way. It pauses not just the function but the whole thread by calling this fs.readFile sync, and from this point that you call this until you get the data, nothing works on your JavaScript engine, on your thread actually. So, and I have used this function, small function, to get the duration so that I could know that for how long this duration has been paused. This thread has been paused. So this is synchronous implementation, but this is the asynchronous implementation using a promise. So it's not a big deal. So now this part just calls that get JSON sync, and this one is just to call the get JSON async, like this. They both call the same, read the same JSON file and log it in their console. And just what I had in mind was just to explain that to create a scenario like this using callbacks. So let's say it's not synchronous. To create a scenario like this using callbacks, we had to create like this, pyramid of doom. Like it was like a pyramid. We had to indent inside every callback. We had to, call the second start the second asynchronous operation using an XHR request or another asynchronous operation similar to this get JSON async. So now I have created the same thing, just doing this. So if you look at this, so the code looks exactly the same. With one single difference. Here we have get JSON sync, but here I have get JSON async. And the only thing that I had to do was to yield over this get JSON async, and I have used awaitify to do this. So it's really interesting. If you want to do this without yield keyword, this is what you have to do. You have to call .then, then on the result of this, and you have to pass your a function, and the parameter that you would be receiving this function would be this data that I have here. Instead of let data, I had to add this data as the argument of my function. Now I could just remove this then and use yield like this. All I have to do is just to wrap my function generator inside this awaitify to create this synchronous looking code which works asynchronously, and it pauses right at this point. On the right side we pass it a promise. So you see this get JSON async, as you could just see on top here, get JSON async, it returns a promise. So the awaitify functionality works like this. You could pass a promise to the yield from the right, and it returns the resolved value of that promise on the left. Okay, this let's see if we have any questions. Okay, so far so good. So I guess now you have a better understanding of function generators and the way they work and the way that we could get the most out of them. It's not the only use case,